The UAE is one of the most favorable countries in the world for tax purposes because they give you access to 0% income tax and 0% corporate tax if you make less than $816,000 a year and 9% corporate tax if you make over that amount. The VAT in the country is also extremely low. Capital gains tax is 0%, dividend tax is 0%, but in order to get access to all of these tax rates, you need to be considered a tax resident of the United Arab Emirates. Many people think that you can simply go and form a company in Dubai and then think that just because the company is registered in Dubai and you pay your salary to yourself from that Dubai company, you're now automatically gonna get access to those UAE tax rates. But unfortunately, it does not work that way. Taxation is based on what is known as tax residence. So every country in the world has their own rules about when they consider someone a tax resident. So in this video, we'll talk about these specific conditions for the case of the United Arab Emirates, which includes cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And you might think that this question can simply be answered by a simple number of days. If you spend an X number of days in the UAE, you're going to be tax resident. But unfortunately, it is also not that simple because the answer is actually quite a bit more nuanced than that. And there are quite a few things that you will need to consider. So to break down when you will be considered a UAE tax resident, what we need to do is go directly into the source, which is the law of the United Arab Emirates. So this text right here is directly from the law of the UAE, specifically Article 4 of Cabinet Decision number 85/2022. And it says that natural persons, where natural persons just mean people, like normal people like you and me, are considered tax residents if any of the following three cases apply. Number one, habitual or primary residence. If a natural person's main home and the place where they handle financial matters are in the UAE, so this is quite a common condition in many countries for determining tax residence. Essentially, if your main sort of home, if your main sort of center of life is in the UAE, then the UAE will consider you a tax resident. Now, what a main home and a main sort of center of financial interest means is always up to interpretation. So this is a kind of subjective condition, but the other two are a lot more objective. The other one is physical presence criteria, spending 183 days or more in the UAE within a 12-month period. Now, this is one of the most common tax residency criteria. Simply, if you spend more than 183 days, which is almost exactly half a year in the country, then that country will be your tax residency, in this case, the UAE. But then we have a third condition, which is pretty interesting. Additional conditions: being physically present in the UAE for 90 days or more within a 12-month period, and where you hold UAE nationality or a valid residence permit, and meeting specific conditions like having a permanent residence or holding a position in the UAE. So essentially what this means is that you could feasibly spend as little as 90 days in the UAE if you also have a real residence permit there. So you have a residence visa. So most likely if you have a company there, you've given yourself a residence visa, you have employment in the UAE because you work for your company and you spend 90 days or more, the UAE will actually, based on this third condition, consider you a tax resident. Now let's imagine a man, call him Francois from France. And what he does is he spent 90 days in the UAE. He has a company in the UAE, he works in the UAE. So by UAE domestic criteria, he will be considered a tax resident in the UAE. However, what he then does is he spends the rest of the year, so 9 months of the year, in France. So while it is true that by UAE standards, he would be considered a tax resident in the UAE, France, by France's domestic rules, would also consider Francois a tax resident in France because he spent more than 183 days in France. And according to French standards, almost certainly they would consider that his center of life is in fact in France, not in the UAE. Now, Francois might think like, oh yeah, I'm a tax resident in the UAE. That means I don't have to pay any French tax. Well, it's not that simple because there's no rule anywhere that says that you cannot be a tax resident in multiple countries at the same time. Now, in this particular case, assuming the UAE and France have a tax treaty, what would most likely happen is that they would look at the text of the tax treaty where they have these what are called tiebreaker rules, where they would determine which one of these countries is actually his actual sort of main home or main center of life. And most likely in this case, if he spends way more time in France than in the UAE, almost certainly he would actually be considered a French tax resident based on the double tax agreement and not a UAE tax resident, even though simply according to the domestic UAE rules, he would in fact be considered a UAE tax resident. And this gets to the big point of this video. In general, it is much more important for you to consider where you are non-resident than where where you are resident. Because theoretically, any of the countries in the world could consider you tax resident. And just because you tell them, oh, I'm also tax resident in this other place, will not help you to not be taxed by that country if they also deem you tax resident, because almost always tax residence will mean, especially in any of these high tax Western countries, that they will tax your worldwide income. So all of your income that you earned in any part of the year from anywhere in the world. So that is why, especially if you're living this sort of nomadic lifestyle where you spend time in multiple places, like I do personally, you sort of want to look at every country that you spend a bit of time in as like a mine that you want to avoid. And you want to carefully look at the rules of any given country you spend time in to make sure you're not triggering their tax residence rules. As long as you do that, you're going to be fine. So that is why I recommend that in most cases, you want to spend at least half a year in the UAE to essentially make sure that it is clearly your main home, that clearly you cannot possibly spend more than that in any other country. Because if you spend only 90 days, then if you spend more than 90 days in any other country, there is a very strong case that that country can make that that place is in fact your main tax home, not the UAE. So to answer the question of this video, technically you can become a tax resident in the UAE if you spend as little as 90 days in the country if you have a valid residence permit. But in that case, you need to be very careful to not spend too long in any other place. Ideally, you don't want to spend more than 90 days in any other country. But as always, this is always going to be a case-by-case thing. So if you're looking to move to the UAE and you want help for your specific situation, for the kind of countries you want to spend time in, you want someone to actually look at all these rules for you and determine how long you should spend in the UAE, how long you can spend in your home country or any other countries you want to spend time in, then what I recommend you do is you book a free call with my business partners down below. They can walk you through everything for your specific situation, tell you what makes sense for you, and then if you decide to use their services, they can also just do the entire process for you, give you all the contacts in your home country to become a non-resident where you are right now, and form your company for you in the UAE. Open your bank accounts for you in the UAE, get your visa for you in the UAE, and also essentially just be there for you throughout the entire process and save you hundreds and hundreds of hours of time that you would otherwise have to spend researching all of these things yourself. So if you're interested in that, that link will be down below in the description. So book that free call if you want to see another video about moving to Dubai, specifically what it actually takes to move to Dubai, what the entire process entails, things like this. You can watch this video right here. And with that, I will see you in the next video.